Do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid. My mother raised my sister and me.
Kamala Harris was all about your family, all about what's happening to America's working families, to America's middle class.
Someone who worked at McDonald's, someone who understands what it's like to be in the middle class.
I worked at McDonald's, too. I still have the burn from the fryer basket to prove it. These are nice stories, but they're not policies or facts relevant to struggling Americans. But what about the headlines? I know what you're saying. Consumer prices grew by their slowest rate in 3 years. That was a headline yesterday. Well, that's mostly because demand is down, and it certainly doesn't help couples trying to buy their first home, which is increasingly out of reach. Plus, overall inflation, it's still up almost 20% since Biden and Harris took office. Food's up 21.8%, rent's up 22.8%, car insurance, oh my gosh, up 55%. I can attest to that. Inflation is highest, by the way, in Chicago, New York, Detroit, and Philly. What do they all have in common? So Kamala raised working class. That's great. But this economy is somehow good for middle-class Americans? Joining me now is Kevin O'Leary, chairman of O'Leary Ventures. Kevin, great to see you as always. The Wall Street Journal did a great piece a couple days ago, just taking that census data that just was released about real median incomes. And the sad truth is that from 2019 to today, Americans have gotten poorer, especially hard hit, the middle class, urban Americans, Black Americans, Latino. The numbers are depressing, but she worked at McDonald's.
Yeah, the data's pretty tough, and it's factual. Earnings power is down. People are being paid less after an inflated basis, and all services and commodities that most families use are up between 21 and 25%. So that is actually probably the most important aspect of this race is how's that going to get fixed? It's the economy. It's always the economy. You know that classic line, it's the economy, stupid? Well, it is the economy. And I think more focus should be put on that, particularly on policy. This is an extraordinary election cycle, and I'd say as an investor, I have to deal with who's ever in the White House on November 6th. And I have to try and figure out what the policies are of both candidates. I have no information from Harris yet, and I can't believe in an election cycle, this will be the first time in modern history, that a potential presidential candidate has not talked to the press. I don't know why she's not talking to you. I don't know why she's not talking to every outlet, because we're not getting any information. I have no information.
And meanwhile, J.D. Vance was on CNBC for a long time this morning, and he took questions on everything from, the debate about tariffs to the economy to, he hit on every issue. He's very available, and we might not agree with everything he's saying, but at least he's answering questions. And Kevin, during that debate, by the way, that everyone's still talking about, Kamala Harris cited Goldman Sachs, claiming that her plan would strengthen the economy. But the Goldman Sachs CEO was asked about this today. Watch.
A lot more has been made of this than should be. What it showed is the difference between the sets of policies that they put forward was about 0.2%. Okay, so economy grows. Okay, if you took these particular sets of policies they looked at, and by the way, we have no idea whether these policies, these things that are talked about, will ultimately be implemented. This blew up into something that's bigger than what it was intended to be.
Well, it was an individual analyst. It wasn't a Goldman Sachs proclamation. I guess people do that in these types of settings, but that wasn't all that convincing as an endorsement of a policy that you said you can't really even dissect.
I'm worried about something else far more important, and I think everybody in this election, regardless of who you want to vote for, should think about this. What is the #1 export of America? Is it a good or a service? Is it technology, oil and gas? No, none of those. The #1 export of America is the American dream. It has been that way for 200 years. There's a reason half the globe's wealth is invested here, and there's a reason people risk their lives to get into the United States. It's the American dream. Now, let's just talk about one policy I'm gravely concerned about. Taxing uncapitalized gains, which destroys capital formation. The reason people come here and why they invest here is to deploy their capital. Now, I got to know what that's about. Is that even a realistic idea? I can't believe that, because that would basically decimate the American dream. So if that's a reality, if that's a real policy, and I wish somebody would ask both candidates what their plans are on taxation, because a 28% corporate tax rate, in the addition to state taxes, would make America very uncompetitive in the G20. And we'd start losing companies like we did when the taxes were that high. They all went to Ireland, particularly the pharma companies. I ask everybody to remember that. Policy matters. So start asking your candidates about policy. It doesn't matter in terms of kumbaya or how you feel about this or that. What matters is policy, and we don't have any. So I'm really concerned. I need those two things I need to know.
Well, I think
those
Kevin,
are very important.
Yeah, I think Trump's policies are pretty clear. I mean, it's basically the policies he did before, and he was going to cut taxes. So, but I would agree with you. Unrealized capital gains, taxing that, we are over if that happens. Kevin, thank you. Wonderful to see you as always.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.